Well, now's one.
Okay. Shall we pray? Our most kind and loving Father, we're so thankful to you for all that you give us. We're thankful for the blessings of the day, the health that permits us to be here, and for the occasion that brings us together. Pray that you be with us in our study, help us to learn things that will be helpful to us, overcoming the evil one. We pray that our blessings will be upon us. Be with Scott as he teaches us. Pray that he might find it easy to recall the things that he's prepared, present them in a way that will be helpful to us. Use us to thy glory in all that we do, and forgive our sins as we turn to in Jesus' name.
Amen. Well, the evil one surely shows up in this parable, doesn't he? And that's what we'll be talking about. But we got like something better going on than what's
No,
happening.
it's upstairs. They're gone.
It's the upstairs. We'll see.
I thought we had like choice of different topics. Anyway, so we're going to talk about the chairs, and that's in Matthew 13. This is one of the like 4 or 5 parables where we actually had Jesus' interpretation, which is always nice. I assume he interpreted that each of the parables for the disciples as they asked for it, but this is recorded for us, so it's great. Have we done the dragnet, Rod?
No, we didn't. So you're very free to refer to that if you'd like to.
Well, I'll make a quick reference, and I feel like it's closely related. Right?
Yep.
To me, the difference between maybe the emphasis in the dragnet is that there is a judgment, and judgment is sure, and everyone is subject to it. Now, certainly that's addressed in the tares as well, but I kind of feel like the parable of the tares, it's more of a matter of time and about methodology of judgment. And I think there's some things that we can learn about the Lord's mercy and his love and his grace in judgment from the tares. So while they both deal with judgment, I think they do it in different ways. But let's jump in. It'd be great if we could get a reader, and if somebody would be willing to read Matthew 13, 24 through 30. That's the parable itself. Anybody got a hand? All right, Barry, you got that. And then for the interpretation, we'll do it right afterward. That would be 13, 36, and 43. Love it. All right, you're on.
And he put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? He said to them, an enemy has done this. So the servant said to him, then do you want us to go out and gather them? But he said, no, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the harvest time I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.
Go with.
Remind me of the verses.
Oh, sorry. It would be 36 through 43.
Thank you. Matthew 13, 36 through 43. Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and said, explain to us the parable of the tares of the field. And he said, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world. And as for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, and the tares are the sons of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. So just as the tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks, and those who commit lawlessness, and will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear.
Thank you. So I think anytime you study these parables, there are a lot of different thoughts that can cross through your mind, right? And themes, sub-themes, main themes, but I always like to think about what is the Lord trying to convey in as a main theme with the teaching. And that was our first question. So I don't know if anybody took a stab at that. I said one well-reasoned statement. I couldn't do that. I got it into 2 sentences. So I'll just confess right out of the gate. Yes, sir.
I look at it as a struggle between good and evil.
Yeah,
And it's there all the time.
it is there it's been there from the beginning. So what I said is it is a conflict between God and Satan, good and evil. And it requires that good will temporarily exist side by side with evil. But knowing this, and it's the will of God, the hearer can take comfort that Satan and his works will be judged, and the righteous will shine forth in judgment. So that was my, as concise as I could get. That was much better. Yes, sir.
To me, the emphasis is on 2 conflicting messages being taught and accepted. And that there's a judgment that awaits these 2 different, what I want to say, respondents to the message.
They're both hearers, right, of messages,
Yes.
but they are completely different messages with completely different ramifications of judgment.
And they're very similar, evidently.
Well, yeah, it seems like at least at a certain stage, the respondents are difficult to separate or tell apart. Right? So I think we kind of started answering the second question, right? What's the great philosophical issue, the problem that the Lord confronts? But then how does he deal with it? How does he deal with it? And what do we learn? What can we infer about the character of God, maybe the nature of God, as we think about how he is? Yes, sir.
It's interesting that he uses, and I'll call it weeds and wheat.
Yeah.
Because as he sits there and he talks about it, the householder talks about it, he tells them not to go out early on and get the weeds out of there. And my question, and I've seen wheat, and it depends on what they really mean by tares. Were they similar looking? So if somebody was to go out into the field and they were to grab up what they thought was the weeds, they'd be grabbing up the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Is that the reason why he backs away and says, wait until they're, and I'll call it mature?
Yeah. They head out, right? We can jump to another question. We'll do that because that's one of the other questions is what is a tear and what particular problem does it pose? But before we do that, before we jump out of this question into that one, what do we learn about the nature of God? Just thinking about how he's approaching judgment. Because I think that's interesting. It's going to be right. It's going to be right. That's for sure. It's going to be just. It's going to occur at the right time, right? Everyone's going to have an even chance. It's going to be right. It's going to occur at the right time. But is this, yes. No. You have the floor.
Okay. I think there's also an element of long suffering here in that he is giving both the opportunity and the time to make a change. Now, obviously, they can't change who they are necessarily from wheat tares, but we can as people.
Yeah. And that's kind of like, with the parable of the sower, we see these different types of soil that were analogous to different hearts and responses, right? So it's a good analogy, but it leaves something short when you're really thinking about a heart. Dirt is inert, it doesn't change, but a heart can change. And I think that's what's going on a little bit here is maybe these things are starting out a little bit rough. Maybe they are bruised reeds, right? We hear about in Isaiah where the Lord is when a bruised reed will be broken. Maybe they are immature, maybe they're weak, but they have the chance to mature. They have the opportunity, the grace, the compassion that the Lord gives us with time. And I think that's, to me, that was what I was thinking as well. And just the mercy, right? So think about what Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9. God is not slow to fulfill his promise. It's going to happen, right? It's sure. He's not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient towards you, not wishing that anyone should perish, but that all should reach repentance. So I think that's clearly, I'm seeing that in the parable, just the mercy, the loving kindness, the compassion. And I think it underscores his wisdom as well. Judgment done at the wrong time, in the wrong way, even by angels, can be detrimental. And so I think we need to be thinking about judgment. You know, we're going to talk a little bit about that as part of it. And we know we have to, in certain instances, exercise judgment, but it has to be good judgment. It has to be righteous judgment. It's not the kind of judgment where we can read someone's mind or think we read someone's mind and think that they're either wheat or tares. I think often, though, we find ourselves wanting to receive grace, but wanting to see justice. Right? Yes.
Well, going back to the tares and the difference between it and the wheat, it resembles the wheat a lot until it forms the head, but it also wraps itself around the roots of the wheat to choke it out.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like the evil people that were around or something, they can influence us to, in that way. So,
Or make it difficult.
right.
Which is, a negative.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, remember that the wheat is actually useful. So when it's mature, it can be harvested and ground up and made to use things.
Yeah.
The tares aren't useful at all. So part of the waiting is also so that the wheat can produce its fruit in the same way that we would be able to produce fruit, over the course of our lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in thinking about the gentleness of God's plan, he's not trying to beat us into submission. Right? He's not sending an army to make things right that are wrong in current times. He is drawing men to himself through the gospel, through his son. And just think of the incredible things, the incredible good that's happening in the world with God kind of, I don't want to say fighting the devil with one hand tied behind his back, right? He is not coming out forcefully, trying to, again, bend our wills. He's drawing people to him. And he's doing that with what? The power of the gospel, with his love, with his kindness, with his mercy. And I think that speaks to, the way we need to be thinking and dealing with people in the city.
I think you made a good point there. There's so much emphasis to me as you look at the parables. I feel like the first parable is the sower went out to sow. And he talks about the different kind of hearts. And I don't think that this is referring to different kind of hearts here. I think this is talking about messages that somehow differ in some critical ways. The devil did not sow the truth.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's To me, I have a hard time thinking of it as a maturing process that goes on, and that I feel the message, the truthfulness of the message. Some have accepted it, and some are something that's kind of a counterfeit message.
Yeah.
It may be similar in some ways. Could you or could someone else in the class come up with, in our day, what would we say are those that are the tares? Who would we say are the tares? Are they the immature, or does it have to do with the doctrine that they've accepted? Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And I think that problem of the doctrine, the two different messages, or the doctrine that's been accepted and the resulting behaviors that are going to develop and grow, that's something that can exist in the church and in the world.
Yeah.
But that's one of our questions. I don't think this is just about out in the world. I think this is in the church as well.
I think it's specifically talking about
I do too.
the church.
I do too. I think that's that's the thing that we really need to take to heart.
I don't think I believe that. Jesus says the field is the world, and the good seed are the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the son of the evil one. He doesn't say that the field is the kingdom or the church.
He says the good seed, though, produced the wheat. Who is the wheat?
I think it's that there's both of these things are existing together. Think about what we learned about Acts 5. Acts 5. Who were we introduced to in Acts 5 who's selling land?
Ananias and Sapphira.
Ananias and Sapphira. What happens there?
They lied.
They lied. And they were judged, right? So were they in the church? I guess you could argue, were they in the church or were they really never in the church? That's kind of like someone saying once saved, always saved. Well, they never were saved, right? So I think they were in the group. They were in the body. This kind of goes also, I think, to the wisdom of the way the Lord is not sending reapers in immediately to make judgment. What did it say happened with the group? Let's turn there for a second. Barry, is this helping or no?
Are you talking about verse 41? Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers and throw them into the fire furnace.
Well, I was going to Acts 5. I was talking about Ananias and Sapphira. So if we look at verse 5, it says, when Ananias heard these words, he fell down, he breathed at last, and great fear came upon all who heard it. If we look at verses 7 through 11, Sapphira comes in. Peter says, tell me how much you sold this land for. Yes, for so much. But Peter said to her, how is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of those who buried your husband are at the door, and they'll carry you out. Immediately she fell down at his feet, breathed her last. When the young man came, they found her dead, and they carried her out. They buried her beside her husband, and great fear came upon the whole church. Then if you jump down to verse 13, what's the result of this? Well, none of the rest dared to join them. They're talking about, the apostles. So this is where I was thinking, this is an example of, I think, a tear in the body, in the kingdom. And then the wisdom of God in not dealing with that every time you see, I've been a tear. I've been down in the valley. I have slipped. My faith has faltered. But you might say, gee, Scott's a nice guy. He's always seems friendly. Well, what happens if I got judged just like that, but the apostles weren't around to explain to me or you that, well, Scott, had sold this piece of property. He lied to me. They knew the heart of Ananias. So I see the wisdom in God not wanting to judge real time and how that could disrupt the wheat by separating the tares out of the wheat. Does that make sense?
Sure.
You're not sure?
Well, this has been problematic among the parables for a long time.
Yeah.
Identifying the characters, identifying the players.
Yeah.
Are identified. And as we said, he says the field is the world. But then when we drop down to verse 41 and 42, we've got him gathering out of his kingdom. I think sometimes that has been used correctly, sometimes perhaps incorrectly. Sometimes when we come to the word kingdom, we think church. Got a big church. Every time the word kingdom is used, talk about the church. When somebody starts a sentence like that, it kind of makes my radar go up because often it is, and that's how we should, I guess, understand it most of the time.
Yeah.
However, the term kingdom is not used exclusively regarding the church. It's used concerning God's creation, people, His creation as a whole, and animate and inanimate.
And he's talking about the kingdom and these two different workers, the Son of Man and the devil, in the world.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and so then you've got the nation of Israel that's identified as the king. Then you've got the church that's identified as the king. And then you've got Paul's statement and Peter's statement, 2 Peter 1, Paul's statement in 2 Timothy 2, about verse 4, verse 18, about his anticipation after he was executed to entrance into the eternal kingdom. So the term kingdom is used at least 4 ways in the Bible. And I think that's helpful, not only here, but other places as we study. But when he says the field is the world, well, is the church in the world? In a very real sense, yes. It's a select group of people called out of the world, but our habitation is here. I mean,
We're in the world, but we're not of the world.
That's right. That's right. And so I think that the point that's being made here is the fellow that sowed the seed. He's identified. That's the Son of God, the Son of Man, as we see. And the fellow that went in and sowed the tares, that's the devil. And who influences the world as a whole? Who influences those in the church? The devil's responsible for that. And is his influence great? Oh, absolutely. He's a very formidable foe, as we see in 1 Peter 5, verse 8. Now, having said that, I think the point that's being made here is that there are both good seed that make up the population, and there's bad seed.
The world.
The world.
Yeah.
As a whole.
Yeah.
There's good seed and there's bad seed. Now, is that true even in the church? Just because you're a good fellow, you've been converted to Christ, does that secure your salvation? Well, no. You've got a lot of growing and such to do, and so the harvest is at the end. And I think that's seen in the latter part of this. If we use this passage to speak exclusively of the church, then that throws the question in, well, what about discipline? We've got so many passages that talk about discipline of unruly members, the fornicator, the false teacher, Titus 3, a host of other passages as well, Romans 16. Now, what do we do with those if we're to wait until the judgment for the Lord to sort all that out? Then that means
It's a conflict with every other.
you've got a conflict. So I don't believe this issue of church discipline is warranted by this passage. It is not.
Well, who's going to judge the world? Whose job is it to judge the world?
Well, we'll be brought before the judgment seat of Christ. He'll judge everybody.
But in 1 Corinthians, I think it's 1 Corinthians 5, it says it's not for us to judge. God will judge the world.
Yeah, well, that's right.
But we have judgment to render, and it's not on the world, it's with people in the body who are struggling.
That's right.
So I'm in agreement with you, and if I wasn't clear on that, I'm sorry. But I see the scope of this as being the world, but I think the church is surrounded by the world, and there is a message here for the church as well.
Oh, yeah. The devil don't just influence those that are not Christians. And that's clear.
Yeah, I mean, if what job would the devil have to do if there wasn't Christian? Right? Yes.
If I just add, certainly has an influence on Christians. But the opposite side of that coin is true as well. Christians have an effect on those that are not Christians.
Absolutely.
And that's why this judgment doesn't come until the end, so that the wheat can have its effect on the tares. Now, it doesn't say that in this parable, but we know that's what Peter teaches, is that God's patience toward us, all mankind, is that all will come to repentance. The second thing I would say is that Jesus is the king. At the end of Matthew, it says that all things are put under the authority of Jesus, the king, right? In heaven and on earth. Right? So he's the king today of all on earth, whether the all on earth want to recognize him as king or not. So his kingdom is here.
Yeah.
And
Well, and that's, and
one day every knee will bow.
I think the parable talks to that. I mean, it says that, you know, we have these two people, one who's sowed at night in the darkness, and one who's sowed in the field. But at the end of the day, the one who sowed at night is going to be subject to judgment, and it will be the Lord's judgment. And I think he says the same thing right at the Yes.
Even though the word kingdom is used in different ways, these parables are about what is the kingdom like. And when you come down to verse 41, the Son of Man will send out his angels and they will gather out of his kingdom.
Yeah.
Now, to me, the context of Matthew 13 is not talking about the world.
You think
It's
it's all
talking
the
about
you think
his
it's all the
kingdom.
kingdom of God?
Yeah. There was the seed that sowed the wheat, and there was other seed that came forth from the devil. What kind of seed is that? Religious teaching and religious influence.
Sure.
I think mostly not, people necessarily being immature or, giving into fleshly lust, although that's certainly those that are attracted to that kind of preaching in the warnings that you have in both Jude and Second Peter. It talks about a lascivious kind of teaching that they were receiving. And so I'm going to stick with my personal guns about the kingdom here being the church and not necessarily referring to the world. But I see the other side as being presented.
Yeah.
And I appreciate Nikki and Chris Porter, he and his wife are here. And I appreciate that point, but I really think that it's what's preached that produces these people. It's two messages that produces what grows up. Some grow up as wheat and some grow up as tares. And it's not.
And some of the tares are in the kingdom.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we have some common ground.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. No, I get it.
Perhaps the nature of the tares, I know you've got a question on this a bit later. Perhaps the nature of the tares is certainly deceptive. And not everybody that appears to be a member of the Lord's church is faithful. And I think that's certainly applied in this.
Yeah. And faithful is a broad term.
It is.
Yeah. So that is a question. What exactly is a tare, and the difficulty they present to the wheat farmer? Characteristics that make them especially appropriate. What characteristics make them especially appropriate for use as a symbol in this story, and how does that play into the difficulty they present in spiritual context? So, having done a little bit of looking at what tares were, you started a little bit of that discussion, but it says that many of the commentators that I looked at considered this the bearded darnel leaf. You'll see that even in the footnote of your Bibles, I think. It actually produces a poisonous grain. And it looks so much like wheat that when the plants were immature, they were almost indistinguishable from one another. In fact, they were. And the Jews referred to the plant as bastard. The root word in Hebrew that they use to describe this is zuna, which also is the root word for committing fornication. So there's this notion of the tares were kind of a wheat that had gone wrong. supports very much what you were saying. And they sapped the nutrients from it. They entangled their roots, and they were very prolific in that way, and so it would make it very difficult to separate them from. So that's kind of what tares were. So, if they exist in the body, they exist in the church, could be very challenging. You might find someone that's somewhat abrasive. It's difficult to deal with. That might be bringing sin through false teaching. And we know we've been warned about that in Jude. We've been warned about it in 2 Peter. We were warned about it in 2 John. But we've got to. We can only make judgments about what we see. I don't think I can judge your heart. I think that's pretty clear what the Lord teaches in Matthew 7, and then again in John, judge righteous judgment. So we have to be careful that we're not caught up in making these evaluations in unrighteous judgment, and be comfortable that God will make all things right in the right time. And that He's the one that's truly capable of distinguishing the apparently good from those who are just and righteous. So, thoughts on that? I'm taking that as no thoughts.
By your fruits you will know them.
By your fruits you'll know them. Right. And in this regard, it was, when you think about these tares in the wheat, it is suggested that the only way you can tell them apart is when they mature and bear fruit. And I don't think it's just a random thing that we would have that instruction by your fruits. So we talked a little bit about dealing with the tares in real time, kind of gathering them out and separating them. I think that, how did Jesus approach sinners? How did He approach sinners?
He was called into question for associating, quote unquote, with those who were sinners. But that's exactly why He came, is to seek and save the lost.
And there's a message for us there too, right? I mean, if we only associate with people in this room, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to carry out our mission as Christians. In fact, I know we weren't going to be able to carry out our mission as Christians. And this is where we have to be in the world and not of the world, but we have to be loving and gentle and kind to people that we see who are part of the world, and who may be part of the world but not us. So in Matthew 12:20, it quotes Isaiah 42:3 about Jesus' character and how He dealt with a bruised reed He will not break. What's a bruised reed?
One that's partially broken or bent.
Yeah. So it's weak, right? It's weak. Is it a hardened heart? I don't think so. I don't think it's a hardened heart, but I think it's someone who might be struggling, who might be immature, who might, just that, and not a strong spiritual constitution. So if we are going around being judgmental and difficult and authoritative in the way we deal with things as the Pharisees, we're going to have a really detrimental effect on people who are immature, people who are growing, people who may be coming out of the world still struggling with things, but trying to get them right. And we can help them by being loving and kind and instructing, not putting up with sin, instructing and pointing it out, but doing it in a right way. Doing it in a way, speaking the truth in love. Right? And to me, speaking the truth in love, we do that because we love each other, and we therefore have to speak the truth. And speaking the truth in love isn't just saying nice things in a loving way. It's we love each other, so we are therefore bound to speak the truth. Any thoughts on any of that? Yes.
The only thought that I would have is if you do have time, I think there is a lot of similarities between the parable of the dragnet, beginning in verse 47.
Yeah. Just a few minutes. You want to read it?
Yeah, Scott, you're teaching. I don't want to take over the class. I just meant that if you have some,
Yeah.
if we have time, I think you can see some similarities.
Yeah. Let's see, what else do we have? Is there anything else that we had a question on that anybody wants to talk about before we jump into that?
I want to note that this is a good example of how we should read a parable, because there is a limit to the language. And if we read too closely, we'll fall into the trap of being so mechanical that we actually come out with the wrong thought. That, oh, the bad seed, and the good seed, those are determined. So you're a bad seed and you're a good seed. We have to be careful about not allowing the reading of the parable to imply something that isn't true.
Yeah. Are we doing okay in our classes? Or was that a comment about us?
No, not at all.
Okay, all right. I was just looking for some real-time judgment and justification.
Yeah, I would also encourage not only the dragnet, but these three parables in a row go together.
The sower,
The sower, the hidden treasure, and the seed, the mustard seed. They go together as to what's God's doing in the world today. I think Christians everywhere at all times want to know, how come God allows things to happen in the world that just don't seem right?
Yeah.
Why doesn't he just make it all good now? Well, there's a purpose for that. We know that our life as Christians, he intends for us to stand out in the world in contrast to the world. And we're supposed to have an effect on the world. And the story of the mustard seed, that the influence can at some point, I thought out of Ezekiel, the tree becomes a place where birds and things can rest in it. And it starts out as this little tiny thing. That's the church. It's powerful in the world. And so I would just say, in your own time, read all three of these together and think about what God's doing in the world.
Well, the problem we had was the guy that was supposed to do the parable of the tares, he was not available to do it when the sower was done. So he was supposed to follow on, but he delayed. So it's that person's fault. So the parable of the dragon, verse 47. Again, the kingdom of heaven, you go, Rod, is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. When it was full, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good into containers, but threw away the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea. So we know that when in Matthew 25, when Jesus stands in judgment, there's going to be people who think they're in the kingdom of heaven who are going to find out that they don't bow like a sheep, but they neigh like a goat, right? And so it certainly ties in with that concept. Rob, is there anything in particular you wanted to say about?
No, I think that the idea that the angels are going to come just like in the parable of the tares, and there's going to be a separation then of the wicked from the just.
Yeah.
And I don't know, to me, that's all consistent. I think it does as you put the parables together, I think the linking of them, you see these ideas overlapping. And I think it's wonderful. I think there's a lot of wisdom, including that if we decide that it's not talking about matters of discipline within the church, which I think that Mickey that point was excellent. There's too many places in Scripture where the church has to do something with problems it's facing, whether it's Matthew 18.
Well, the Lord will be contradicting himself, teaching that
Yeah.
this is not about discipline, and then saying in Matthew 18:15 through 18,
Yeah.
no, you need to go to your brother, and if you win them with a kind word or with whatever, with your confrontation or your bringing to their understanding that you know that they've sinned against you and they accept it, great. If not, bring it before the church. That's discipline. So that would be the Lord contradicting himself, and I don't think that's possible.
No, I think you're right.
I don't think so. I clearly don't think this is about church discipline. Something going back to Ken, your comment about the compassion of the Lord in his judgment, and the loving kindness and long suffering nature. Even the angels were not capable of doing this in a way that it would be compassionate and loving. How would James and John have done this?
Call fire down.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Immediately.
So we're just not cut out for it. We're not cut out for it. Not only can we not appropriately judge hearts, but I don't think our methods are the kind of methods that the Lord needs in order to draw people. And by allowing judgment by allowing the tares and the wheat to grow together and judgment to be delayed, he can clearly demonstrate to those who are his followers, tares will be gathered first and burned, and then the Lord's people, the Lord's followers, will shine forth. That's our class. I think we've had one buzzer, I think.
Yeah.
We've got about 10, 15 seconds before we get the next buzzer. Any final comments? Questions? We used to have a math professor that would say, questions, comments, snide remarks, but we're not.
We're gonna have a good study next week. Corey's gonna take the class,
Great.
and he's gonna talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan. That should be an excellent study.
Yeah. Is that the last week?
No, we've got two more Wednesday nights after that.
Well, thank you for your attendance. I appreciate it. And your comments and participation.